family, very, very serious about legacy, very, very serious about village and continuity and unity. And so this young woman who was actually from the village, was actually the next chief was going to come through her line, not her cousin, her male cousins or brothers, but through her heir. And they were concerned that she did not have an heir yet. Right? And she was very, very, very humble, very sweet, very now you have to listen, this is a young woman, she has a PhD, she's a teacher, she's very young, very accomplished. And I felt, at one point I went to her and I said, well, are you okay? She goes, yeah, this happens every time I come. They tell me, where's the baby? Where's the child? Where's the heir? And they're very serious. They even sent a contingent of people to take counsel with her about this while we were there. It was just, it was just absolutely amazing. So we had entree into a very unique purview of the internal workings of family and of culture, which we would not have been privy to had we not known her.
Is it known far and wide what happened in specifics by the African, or just in concept? In other words, is it part of the curricula? Is it part of the cultural ritual? How is the story passed on, if it is adequately?
I went to, well, first of all, I don't know. I don't know on a broad level. I know at university it is, at the university level.
Right.
It certainly is taught. And we got to remember, W.E.B. Du Bois was buried there. That's where he is.
I know.
Is where he is. So, he certainly
Kwame Ture as well. Yeah,
exactly. So there was that real connection that was there. And I think that Nkrumah and the whole importance and the significance of Nkrumah and what he brought in his attempt to unite Africa in concert with W.E.B., who was very clear about the fact that we needed to establish this very strong African and African American presence there. So I think for certain it's there, it's clear. But to some degree, there's a blind spot, in the same sense that there was a blind spot for me about what was experienced even there. There's to some degree a bit of a blind spot in terms of what happened to us. I think that's changing now. It's changing just for the simple reason that media has kind of brought the continents together so that we can kind of get a better or more broader perspective. I wanted to speak to something. Someone asked me, Joy, in a nutshell, if you could explain what it was I could bring back that could help promote the healing that I am so committed to. And the first thing I would say is you've been bamboozled, you've been hoodwinked. I have never in my life experienced such a vortex of dissonance around what I experienced in these villages and as I interacted with African people and the images of African Americans and what we have bought into in this country about who and what we are as African Americans and as Africans. Let me give you a couple of examples.
Oh, yes.
A couple of these examples, and I gotta kind of bring closure to the slave castle, because there were two pieces that I think we have to understand happened as people confused and naked were hoarded and kind of pushed into these places. The first thing they did was made them Christians, took away their names, their African names, their African believing. They were stripping them of their African religion and their African beliefs and traditions and rituals. They did not, but they attempted to by changing their names and making them Christians. So in the middle of, for example, Elmina Slave Castle is a church. It's a church right in the middle.
Please.
Yes. And here's even worse. In the same slave castle.
In the middle of the slave fort?
Middle of the slave fortress, Portuguese church was right there in the middle. It's you can't even wrap your head around it. It's such a contradiction, it's such hypocrisy that you can't even believe it. Here's the other thing. The governor, you visited the dungeon, and then above the dungeon are the places, the living quarters of the officers and the governor and his wife and children. There is a staircase that the governor had built from his bedroom to the female slave dungeon. Had it built that led directly to the slave dungeon. so he could have access to the women. And if you look just across the courtyard, you see the church. I mean, but you are the beast. You are the violent one. You are the rapist. You see, the images that we have of African people, African American people, in addition to that, is, I mean, it is the polar opposite of what I experience. Now, please, far be it from me to glorify Africa. I am not. I am talking about the subtle reality, the intrinsic core of who African people are. And there is a poise, a dignity. There was no swearing. I never heard public swearing. I never even saw public affection. I saw people were very well disciplined, very, very moral, very kind, very, actually mellow, very laid back. Now you contrast that with the images that America has given us of the African American. Here is the most horrific thing about it. The people that Africans were gentle, kind, loving people, generally speaking. This is the character of the people. They were then taken from their homeland, raped, beaten, imprisoned. I'm looking at all of these things and then telling the entire world that we were beasts. So the images which have continued are the images that we see on television. Our young black men and women see and begin to believe that they are. A lie that was manufactured hundreds of years ago that persists and that now has become who we are.
Okay, we got to take another break. We'll be back, Tarzan notwithstanding. Makes me wonder because growing up in Harlem, we didn't learn anything about what happened in this passage, this middle passage that you're describing. And I was just wondering, on a counterpart, does the African understand what happened to us after we were gone, after we were kidnapped? What happened to us? Is there a general understanding, or of course it's closing now? Of course
it is now. But here's the thing that's amazing about that. You know, you often hear the apologists, the folks say, "Well, you sold each other. You did it, right?" Well, you know, as I started to study, and I'm actually writing an actual chapter for a book on trauma, and understanding the spiritual rituals and practices that people have sustained in the midst of trauma. So that's the purpose of this article. So it required that I do research around the spiritual belief systems and rituals that Africans practice, that they held on to. And so you have to look at their ontology, their cosmology, how they look at the universe, right? And they do believe, and they used to say that, you know, that of course they were polytheistic. They actually believed in one God, that there was a God creator, and then they looked at all of which came from God, including earth, heaven, these sorts of things. But what's interesting is there's no conceptualization within that concept, that structure, that construct of reality, that suggests dehumanization. You see, they see the plateau or the level of human. You never ceased to be human. So it's not conceptually possible that Africans could have known that Europeans would dehumanize the African enslaved people, who were often, you know, folks that, you know, were warriors and a variety of others. They couldn't conceptualize that you could dehumanize them because there was nothing in their culture that spoke to that. Do you see what I'm saying? So they would think, well, yes, we've enslaved people, but they never lose their human status. So that would have been an impossibility, which is an interesting kind of